All right, hello. Welcome to Low-Code Campfire, episode 117 for September 29, 2023. It is an open lines Friday and perhaps a low attendance day, but that will be fine too. This is our opportunity to get together and share experiences about what's going on in low coding. Before we get to that, though, let me introduce myself. I'm Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plant and App. I am joined today by Patrick Anderson, Technical Support Manager for Plant and App. And we'll dig in and go wherever the conversation leads. This is an opportunity for us to get together, talk about the way that Plant and App is being used in our businesses and in our projects. We oftentimes have techniques and questions and problems, and so we work on those in this hour. All these past hours are recorded, put out on YouTube, so youtube.com/plantandapp. You can get all of these episodes, plus the episodes of the Low-Code Cafe, which is content that is more of a training nature. We'll run this agenda. We'll stop and say hello and then do first call, any questions that you might have. And after a while, we may adjourn into afterglow and have an off the record, off the recording conversation. But do engage with us, jump in, show and tell, show us what you've got going on, ask questions. If you have noise going on behind you, please mute. Beyond that, you can submit questions and topics in advance. You can use this QR code or any of the links in any of the emails that we send to you to do that. So with that, good morning. Hello, Patrick. Hello, Reba. Hello, Mark.
Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
Absolutely.
Uh-oh, Mark's in the car. He's running away.
Yeah, he showed briefly there.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Mark was on my mind this morning. I am busy putting together a session for the DNN Summit, and I know Mark is heavily involved in DNN Summit. So that comes up in March. Is that correct, Mark? Anyway, trying to add some relevance and contribution back to the DNN community. That's a goal I'm putting together a session for, so hopefully it will be accepted and useful to the community.
Can I ask what that is? What the DNN Summit is?
So Mark could probably give a better definition than I, but it is a virtual summit that, let me find my notes for that.
Yeah, it's a virtual summit. It's a meeting with seminars, learning opportunities, many sessions on topics DNN and website related. Not all of them are DNN. Some are like marketing or strategy, having to do with websites and businesses that surround websites. It's very educational. It's a very good opportunity to meet more people in the DNN community. Everyone should go.
Thank you.
We see. I think I have the link to it. Yeah, I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. Takes me a second to find the chat here. So that's February 7th and 8th. I guess I better put that on my calendar and make sure I don't schedule a vacation or something out of office that day.
I'll just put in a plug myself. I've attended both in previous in-person summits and an online one, and there's always a ton of valuable information to gain from attending the sessions.
So I couldn't agree more.
I gotta drag this on here. I see our own Mark Buelsing right
Yeah,
front and center. Yep, and there's Don.
Yep.
So previous years. I wonder if is there any discussion about bringing that back to in person?
Yes, there's ongoing discussions all the time. In fact, the virtual events make just a little bit more than what it costs, and those extra amounts are going towards doing an in-person event next time. So it might be next time, might be next year.
Cool.
My involvement with Summit only started after I started working with Plantain App. I was working with DNN tools before that, and never to the degree that I thought I'd get benefit out of it going to the Summit. So I missed out on all the in-person ones, and I'd love to be fun to sit and meet.
Here's a fascinating little side story regarding Summit. I went to the Summit in Denver in 2019, and that was the Summit where Bogdan first introduced the concept of Plantain App to the DNN community in a session there, and I didn't attend the session. I went with some colleagues, and we decided to divide and conquer the sessions, and one of my colleagues went to the Plantain App session.
You picked the wrong one.
I went.
Oh, did you? Yeah, cool.
Yes, I had a private conversation at about that time with Bogdan about that, and I was having a hard time grasping the difference between the conglomeration of all of the DNN Sharp tools, which was our precursor, versus the Plantain App as a whole, and so that certainly has morphed together since then, and now it's becoming something more than that. So. Cool. Anyway, so that's DNN Summit. And Don, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Good morning. Are you you've spoken before at DNN Summit, right?
Yes, I have. Thanks. And I'm very, very late in applying for a speaker role, but I'll be writing something up today and getting it in. So sorry, Mark.
Thanks for telling me.
Good. All right. Did anybody come with a first call kind of thing that we can work on? Or any kind of a call?
I have a general question, not a problem with how to do something. But DNN just the guys just released DNN 13. Was wondering where you guys are in saying compatibility with 12 for that matter. And then of course what your plans are for how you guys test to get to the point of saying, yeah, the current version is good with 13.
Right. So you are correct. Our highest recommended version is DNN 9.11.2 currently recommended version. And that is out on our, and I'm going to do it just because we can. I'll always love to make sure that these links are available and people know where this stuff is. So in our documentation under important notes, we have our compatibility. And so we're compatible up to DNN 9.11.2. Let me put that link in the chat. And then our process is, what we'd like to do is to be able to, it's not really a separate event where the release schedule of DNN drives us to go test it. It's the other way around, that we adopt it typically in one of our, as we start a new version of, so for example, we're on in the throes of releasing version 1.26. So as we attack the next version, I would expect we'll pick a platform, and all of our developers and all of our testing happen against the higher DNN version. So then I would expect the recommendation would change after when the either in the middle of 127 of our development cycle or as it's being released, that would become the recommended version. We know that we had some issues with version DNN 9.12 there were some high CPU things, and whether that was DNN 9.12 or in conjunction with us. So, it really is important that we do the testing and make sure that things work. So, I know there's a balance between being on the bleeding edge of the new versions versus being and being secure and being stable, and all those things kind of roll together. But did you recognize that as a non-answer, Don? I mean, it's a process, not a specific.
No, it's a fine answer. I don't mind. It's always good to get a general sense of what the plan is. Frankly, there's been cleanups, etc. 11.2 cleaned up a problem that I had, so I needed to have it work with 11.2, and I'm good there. And there's been a few little bug cleanups between 11.2 and now, but really the big thing that always highlights the list of fixes is getting rid of Telerik. And you just keep, not only do we get rid of it, it's not anywhere, So that's the latest 1, 2, and 3 of the fixes in version 13 having to do with Telerik. So that's fine. I'm done with that. So I'm not seeing features or bug fixes that I really have to have. And I've explained that to clients who are interested in staying up to date. So far, so good. I'm good with 125, I think. Is it 125 and 11.2? That's the combination.
Yeah, the 125 is our current platform. So
yeah.
You're as high as far released as we are. So from a feedback standpoint, we would welcome those of you who have a test environment or can work up a test environment and install these higher versions. We'd love to hear about your experiences with them, whether you've had problems or otherwise. We don't advise you doing it on a production environment, but if you have a test environment and you can spin up 9.13 and install our software, we would love to hear about it. We're in the process of, because of the experience with version 9.12 and this high CPU thing, it ended up, we had a client that installed it on a production site, and it was all working other than the part that it went to 100% CPU and then was very, very non-responsive. So as kind of in a reaction to that, we're working on going the extra mile to send out an email when we notice that you upgrade to a non-recommended combination, and just to kind of make sure that that you've gotten ahead of us. We'd love for everybody to come to our compatibility matrix and know where we are with recommendations. But if you go ahead and do it, you're likely to get an email from us now saying, hey, just make sure you test, make sure that you're beyond where we've recommended to go.
You just made mention of the experiences with with one of your clients and the high CPU and long load times. Is that what you're experiencing?
Right, because their CPU, this is on a version of 9.12, I think, 0, but they installed it, and then together with plant and everything seemed to be working fine. They went away, and then the next day came back and their site wouldn't load, and so it was just taking so long to run that. It's taking so much. Whatever was going wrong was taking so much that the site wasn't responsive at all, and it's really from a support standpoint, it was taking so much that I couldn't get even connected to their RDP was very, very hard. So very slow problem to deal with, and the end result of that was we figured out that they had upgraded, and that was the only thing that was different. They were on 9.11.2, they upgraded, and it went sideways. So
I have a site that has Not very much, but a couple of things in Plan and App, couple of forms, and it's 9.11.2, and I've experienced where it loads immediately. You know, when you go to the site, there's no Plan and App functions on the home page. Loads immediately, and then it goes when you click on any other link, it takes a very long time for the next page to load. And when you mentioned that, I was wondering if there's some tie-in in some way I should be looking for it. I asked the guys at DNN for less, and they couldn't reproduce it. So they thought maybe it's something on my side. But as soon as you said that, I was wondering if that's a path to try to debug. But I'm guessing that it's 9.11.2, it's not 9.12, and probably not the same thing.
Yep.
Okay.
Probably not. Okay. Good. What's next? While you're thinking about that, as always, I come with a little something in my back pocket to talk about. Last week, we talked some about documentation, and as a result of that, the product team came up with, we're going to have an action called code notes. This is what we internally are calling a quick win, something that we can do easily and allow you that will help for you as low-code developers to be able to document your solutions. So it would look something like this, where you could add in the code section, we have a thing called notes. You could add a notes anywhere in your, whether it's, I'm doing it in workflows, but it could be in a form or a API or an automation, wherever. And it's basically a no op, right? It's not going to do anything, but you can say, you can put documentation in line to say what it is that you're doing in that particular piece, or remind you or point you to wherever, hyperlinks, anything that's useful, just internal documentation, internal notes. This is step one in a story about being able to do true documentation. And so we're taking on that in a bigger sense, but didn't want to make you wait until we have the perfect solution to at least be able to make better code, right? I don't know about you, my experience in coming behind somebody else who does low code, that it's very easy to make things work and do a lot of work, but if you to do a lot of functionality, but if you weren't the developer and didn't keep other notes, it might be hard to understand how everything comes together. So putting it right in line to me is useful. Thunderous applause. I'm sure that you're all going to see that soon. Okay, what else?
I had talked a couple of times about a project that I'm doing where I'm generating PDFs, and then Ben came up with a great suggestion of don't make a gazillion PDFs, just make one. And then each page would use the page break always style, or CSS, what do you call that, directive, description, whatever it is. At any rate, so the mechanism for this loop is I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. I've been interrupted like 20 times since the last time we talked about it, so I haven't been able to get back to doing it, but I have started it, and I started a workflow of creating one PDF. And then what I wanted to do was have an automation that builds a list of how many of these PDFs, how many records I need to process, and then do a loop calling the workflow. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out where do I change the style of the PDF that's in the workflow from page break never, which is the first page, to page break always, which is the style for every subsequent one. And my thought was I could just have a token, but I wasn't sure where the scope of things are. Do I have that token in the automation that calls the workflow, so that the first time it goes through, I have the token set for page break never, and then at the end of that loop, I set it to page break always, and then every time it goes through the loop, it just resets it to page break always when it calls on the workflow. Is that the place to put it, or do I put that logic somewhere in the workflow?
So I think, the workflow is going to need to know if the workflow's design is to do one page and it doesn't know anything about how many pages are going to be there, and yet it's the one doing the work to put in the page break information into the PDF. I think you want to pass something like an is first or is first page kind of parameter into the workflow, which would be very easy to respond to as you're building the PDF, right? So you would have a token is first, and you could conditionally do something if is first. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
So the workflow gets insulated from, you could use it to produce one page. You could use it to produce 10 pages. Assuming the design that you said, that the looping is going on in the automation and the workflow just is responsible for one thing, then you just tell the workflow can have a parameter, and then you can reference that parameter. The workflow context is isolated from the automation context. It doesn't know, workflow only knows what it gets from the input. So you have to pass it in.
Good. So right now the workflow input is a record. So it's the ID of whatever the first of the list, or wherever they are, it is in the list. So it's the application record. But now you're saying that the workflow, that would still be the case, and then add another variable for input, but then the output is still just HTML output, which is the content of the PDF in in a big token.
Okay. So
that means that in the automation, at the end of the automation, I would just say the HTML output in an update token action, the HTML output is equal to the HTML output plus the new HTML output from the loop. Got it.
So again, sticking with your design, we can talk about that perhaps a little bit more, but if your loop is going to be inside your automation, so you've got a for each item in an entity list action going on, from there you can develop your own value for is first or is first page, and then pass that to the workflow as you go. So the first time it starts with true, and the rest of the time it's false, and you're good to go.
Got it.
I've gotten to the point that when I design automations, I usually I think that the question is, how much work do you do in the automation versus how much work do you do in a workflow? Because it's very easy for an automation to call a workflow and get it to do the work. So, for example, in your case, when the condition comes up, you might call a workflow that does that looping and working. Which could still call a workflow responsible for producing one HTML. Workflow automations can call workflows that call workflows, and the the difference is that I mean, it's all going to get the work done, right? But if you might call that, want to call that loop out, other than as a result of automation, or maybe in two different automations, if you design it as a workflow instead, you can call it from anywhere. So an API could call it an automation could call it and so just consider the possibility that all that looping might be a workflow that you just call from the automation.
Got it.
Putting it into the automation is not wrong. It's just more reusable if you put it in a workflow.
Is there any difference in scope? So if a workflow calls a workflow, does the variables in the top level workflow in the loop know or pass? Does it have to pass it?
No. Anything, workflows are independent scopes. So anything that you want the subordinate workflow to know, you have to pass as input.
Oh, okay.
Or data. But yeah, there's no memory scope. No shared memory scope.
All right.
So yeah, but then that also helps. I mean, to have very defined input points are, to me, are very useful, right? That your workflow accepts it needs these 5 inputs to work, and so you can very clearly see, and they become very testable. If I have these 5 inputs, it's going to do this work and produce an output. Versus an automation is it's a stack of actions and has it to me, workflow is a little more readable and repeatable, testable. I feel like I'm floundering a little bit, Patrick. And now I'm going to call on you. Do you agree? Do you have a different technique?
No, I think that that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, that's fine. I haven't worked out the automation part of it yet, so I haven't actually put a loop in there. I've been, like I said, interrupted too many times. And when I started at the workflow. I said, "Oh, I got all this logic that I used to build the PDF in the first place, and I did that as a button on the record. So in the action grid." I added a button per record that said, "Make me a PDF out of this."
Yes.
And then, and I had some logic in there, and they kept changing what the form should look like. And I've already diatribed about, or ranted, I guess is a better word, about people using PDFs all the time. But I had to keep changing things. And I said, well, now I need to go and put that logic in and make decisions. Is it this kind of a form or that kind of a form? Because they have 2 different forms that we're generating from these things. And then the whole idea was to give them one database of people that were requesting to vote by mail, and they really have it in their head that it has to be 2 different groups of people with 2 very different looking forms that get printed out and stacked up and all of that. Again, I'm going into the rant. So my goal was just to get the form of the PDF done right, and which one is going to be done, and then I would go into this loop of how to get them all into one PDF and then send that off every hour. So I'm not at that point. So I'm good with trying it as a workflow within a workflow, and then the trigger, the automation would just trigger the main workflow.
Yep. Pass in whatever it needs to get started, and you're good to go.
Ben had his hand up. for a long time, and then he stopped. Maybe he had a suggestion. Number of times that he's helped with the SQL statements and questions that I've had. I really appreciated it. So if I was interrupting or taking too much time, sorry. But Ben, if you had a suggestion on how to do something, I'm always happy to hear it.
No, I was just gonna kind of ask for some clarification on the flow of logic that you were utilizing, and specifically, like, where was this being triggered and why an automation as opposed to a direct call? Just trying to understand, so in my head, if there was anything that I could think of that might be helpful.
Oh, sure. Very, very briefly, the overall project was that I wanted to eliminate the idea of PDFs altogether, and so they could just use the list of data, the input stuff that people filled in the form, the person's name, their address, what ballot they wanted, that kind of stuff, and just use that in a table. Literally spit that out to an Excel sheet and did everything in whatever their process is in generating the when they go to mail out the ballots. That's really all they need. But no, they wanted to have my system provide a PDF of the application to vote by mail so that they can take that and type it in somewhere else into another system. So the flow that I've now come up with is that every hour I'm going to see if there are new applications, because there are a lot of these applications coming in regularly. And so every hour I was going to see if there's new applications that have been, new record that doesn't have the it's been processed bit set to, and if there are, then I would loop through generating one big PDF, attach it to an email, or at least the link to it to an email, and then send it to them saying, here's another batch of them. And then they would click the link, they would get the PDF, they would print it out, which would be, dozens maybe of application forms, and then they would deal with them like they always do. But that way they're not getting hundreds of emails with separate, each email having a separate, an individual's request. Now they have a bunch. So that's the overall goal of the project. And so the automation will be basically, it'll kick off on the hour, and then go do its check. If there's none, it will send an email saying there isn't any. If there is some, it'll send an email with, here's the link to this hour's PDFs.
So right now, you're pulling out a list within the automation, and then your workflow is just producing one document?
Right now there's nothing, but the intent is that the automation will basically be triggered on a timer. So I didn't think about it, but yeah, it has to be triggered on a timer. That's right, because the automation has to it's got to send an email out. It's going to be there's none or there's a bunch, and here it is.
Right, but what I'm saying is your workflow.
Yeah.
The intent of the workflow is to return one document per call.
The inner workflow was to generate one HTML token, and that token would be what I would typically use in a create HTML or create PDF. So the output of the first loop, the output of the first workflow, the inner workflow, is go grab a record and figure out what the form should look like and fill it out, and all of that would be a hunk of HTML with a div that started with a page break never. Then the next time around, the next loop would be the next record, and it would be a hunk of HTML with a div that says page break always, and output of that workflow I would add to the previous HTML token. Now I've got two divs and one big HTML, and it'll just loop, loop, loop. And then at the end of that loop, when I'm done with all the records, I'll have one giant hunk of HTML with a bunch of divs, the first one being page break never, all of the rest being page break always. And then I would run a create PDF that would give me a file. And then I would grab an email and give the link to that file in an email and be done.
Okay. I think I follow. And forgive me if I'm not thinking of this correctly, but I would hazard to say or think that it would probably be easier and better self-contained with a single workflow. I don't really understand the idea of multiple workflows. One workflow can, in the very beginning, pull out all of the records, create a list of what needs to be processed, run through that entity list, or excuse me, that list, not entity. Each loop will automatically, you compile whatever you need to compile and whatnot into your running token that holds all of the HTML. When you're in a loop like that, you have an index, so you can see if you're on the first record or not, and use that as your trigger on whether you're going to do a page break before always or not. At the end of that loop, you have your HTML still within the workflow, build your PDF, and then kick off your email. Everything could be done in just the workflow. Like, the only thing the automation is going to do is call the workflow. That's it. Nothing else.
Okay.
And then one workflow could do everything else you needed to do.
And Ben, I agree that one workflow could do everything. The difference is that it allows two workflows in this circumstance let you focus on different parts of the problem and make a testable, repeatable functionality. So the inner workflow producing the HTML, I think, is a really good approach. You can make sure that you get the HTML generation for PDF working exactly the way you want to, and then that's a totally separate thing that's maintainable as a unit. And then putting the loop in a second workflow,
and maybe reusable.
And maybe
not certain, but it's possible it could be reusable. And that's what I like about it too. It's reusable, but also I like the compartmentalization of it, that you can, exactly what Dale said, you can troubleshoot the one thing easily, and then go to the broader workflow and know that one part is working exactly the way you intended it to work.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I can also see that I can create a button on the list of applications that call the one workflow to, and I can use the ID value in that call to pass that. This is the record that I want. And then that one thing, and then the output would be the HTML of one of them. And then I can create PDF of the one. And I could do that using that same workflow that I did to do the automation with the big loop of doing them all per hour. So that is true. I like that. I like the idea, and you were going with the index and knowing the index, and I agreed that did make sense right there. So if all I was going to ever do was the hourly loop through, then it'd be easier to have the index and just do it all in one. But I also may want to give them the opportunity to, move away from this PDF stuff and only generate it if they absolutely had to. And then just give them a button on each record that said, here, go ahead and make a PDF of this guy. And then I could use that same workflow for either.
So a lot of that comes down to preferences, and I think someone could make an argument on the other side, more in line with what Ben's saying, that An all-in-one is going to have other characteristics that you might be beneficial in certain circumstances. But for me, and I stated as a preference, I like the discrete workloads. Cool. All right, what else is going on? Anybody? Okay, well, next week when you think about me, that I'm almost on a cruise boat. So that's Patrick is in charge while I'm away. Actually, Patrick's in charge all the time. I just help
yeah, right.
But it'll be nice to Patrick. He may or may not have a second chair, so somebody help him out.
I'm going to be jealous of you being on the cruise, so you guys have to help me through that.
Where are you going, by the way?
Out of Vancouver and ending in Hawaii.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, never been to Hawaii, so that'll be nice.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Always wondered if what Hawaii would be like. I'm a Caribbean guy. I've gone to three I think cruises in my life, and they've all been Caribbean. Loved it. I think going to Hawaii would be neat to see. I've heard people tell me that Hawaii is a different experience, and they liked it better, frankly. But I've really enjoyed the Caribbean, so I don't know.
Good deal. All right, Patrick, can you think of any other technical topics that we might introduce, or have we come to a full stop?
I need to pull. I was actually I moved into that PDF mode and was looking at something because I thought it showed the example of the workflow of a separate workflow creating a PDF, but actually it demonstrates Ben's preference. I can share that real quick if we want to just have a little bit more of that discussion. But the other thing that I wanted to think about is we recently added to an action the ability to specify a user. And Dale, can you remember what that action is? Gosh, and I wish I had noted that down. But what I wanted to briefly talk about is the fact that we have several other actions that I don't know why we didn't really process this when we were doing that for this one specific action. But we have several other actions that act on the user that's currently in context and don't allow you to specify the user. And I was wondering if, because it just came across in some support this week that that is another point at which we complicate things. And I was wondering how people felt about anywhere that we have an action that acts on a user in context. It seems like that it would be nice to be able to specify a user in any of those actions. So I thought I'd just put that out there and see how people felt about that.
So that probably is in the realm of either creating a user, setting a password, perhaps setting a role.
So the specific action that I dealt with this week was unauthorizing a user, which is a little bit. It actually I couldn't reproduce it, but the person I was supporting unauthorized themselves accidentally. Because of this need to load the user. They did load a user before the action but somehow they ended up unauthorizing themselves as well. I tried to reproduce it, and I wasn't able to. I wasn't able to unauthorize the user that I was logged in as, with the same scenario, loading the user that you want to unauthorized, then running the unauthorized action, and then reloading the user that you're logged in as. That's the scenario I used. But it does seem like an action that would be definitely very useful to be able to specify the user that you want to unauthorize, so that you don't do something like
So
accidentally.
can you, I see there's revoke user role, this unauthorized that you're talking about. Is that different from?
Yeah, that's the DNN approved user functionality. When a user registers, you can have them registered but not authorized, which means they need to go through an approval process of some other approval process to become an authorized user of the site.
And it is, what's the action to make them unauthorized, unapproved?
It's called unauthorized, I think. I can.
I'm sorry. There it is on my
Yeah.
list. Unauthorized user. So unauthorized user has no parameters at all. So
Nope, it doesn't. It just
it has to be you. So you have to use load user with this.
Yeah. And there's several other actions in there. And I just remember the action that we added the context to was the grant user role action. We didn't previously have the ability to specify a user with grant user role, and now we do. That was a recent change that we did.
So perhaps we take as an action item that so they're probably all here in user management that we should review.
Yeah.
These for consistency and passing in a user. So I see authorized user has no context either. You just and it would be so easy to make it be, you specify a user, it's the, it'd be very easy to specify a user ID for these. So I suspect these grew up out of early implementations, early uses of action form, where you might use an action form to handle user registration, and the view at the time was, I'm only, I'm not worried about managing the whole system. I'm just trying to get a user in here. And so they probably didn't have as big a vision as we have now. So yeah, maybe you could put that on the list as a theme to review the user management and get consistency across that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from anybody else on the call? The theme of value. Has anybody else struggled with that? Because
when you run a workflow from an automation, the automation asks what the context user is, right? So,
Yes.
at 3 a.m, you're running your hourly process. It's, you can set it to run as your main admin guy. But then when it goes into the workflow, does the workflow that it calls run at that context, or do you need to specify it inside the workflow, like load user head admin guy?
So I believe that if you load a context user in automation and then don't change that at all, that user is the user that's in context when your workflow runs.
Got it.
That's correct. And so yeah, the unauthorized user specifically, I know that the authorized user doesn't either, and I think that should as well, but specifically the unauthorized user action, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that we can't specify a user, because the most likely scenario for you using an unauthorized user action is because there's like say you're creating a form, an administrative form, where you go in and you decide that somebody has broken some rules or something like that, and you think they shouldn't be an authorized user anymore. That's So in order, if you're logged in and you just have an action that just runs unauthorized, or you're unauthorizing yourself, and so that doesn't seem to make sense unless you load the user into context.
Yeah, it seems to assume that load user first, then you unauthorize user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Mark just chiming in. I've had the same thing happen to me. I have unauthorized myself and had to recover from that. And I've done it more than once. So I've also had the situation where I was trying to authorize a user and I wound up, it wasn't working because I found out I was authorizing myself over and over when I was trying to authorize someone else. So yeah, I always thought that the logic wasn't wonderful there. I would like to be able to specify the user or user ID that I'm trying to do these things to.
Cool. Thanks for the feedback there. Dale's up to something here.
Well, I'm trying to prove out whether the context user survives into the workflow. I believe it's two. Yeah. And so we're going to log the out and put it here just so we can see this thing run. So if it works as expected, it's not going to be user ID 1 that gets done. It's going to be whatever the user ID that's associated with this. So this is my little test the echo routine. See if I can find it again. Test the echo and we'll let it run. And we'll look at and it here it is right here. It ran as user 3, and I should have put the name. That would have been too easy, right? But actually, I'll do that. Back to workflows. So if I run this as myself, so we get my big long username here. If we go into automation and run it, which it has that. Again, that's encoded to run for a particular user for this one. That it ran as that one. So the answer is yes. When you have a context user in automation, it will pass into the workflow. The workflow could also use the load user and change the context, but it will follow. That's one of the things that will follow in the workflow. Okay. If no questions about that, I'm going to mention there's a few new features that we're putting into place, and I don't know if it's going to impact you or not. You'll see these show up in version 126, soon to be released. Things around search boost. our search product. So if you're using search to index things, whether it's data or files or external sites, whatever, we're adding an action that will let you trigger the reindex of a behavior. So each behavior is listed here. Each behavior can have different attributes of what's included, but we're adding the ability to, instead of having to come in and click, let's reindex this behavior, or there's ongoing indexing that happens even over time. But if you want to cause the full thing to be reindexed, right now you have to come in and click the button. We're adding a action that will let you do that. And then there's each behavior can index rules, for example, based on doing a particular select out of the database. And so we're adding one that will trigger a particular rule to index immediately. So, which gets to be, you can determine the use case. We have a use case for this. And then we've talked about in Campfire before the ability to get the results of a search. It's possible to get the results of a search by an API call, but that really says, that really adds an extra loop into things. If you're trying to get a results of a search from your current site, and you're having to do it through an API call, you're doing an external communication. So we're adding an action that'll let you do a search as well. So some enhancements along the way to what's already a useful search functionality. In case that's of value to anybody, that's coming up. Okay. Coasting into the end of the hour. We will thank you for joining us and making this hour better. So thanks for joining. A lot of you will get together again next week, and we'll do it again. So happy low coding, and I will see you after a while. Enjoy, Patrick, coming up.
Have a good trip and have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your trip.